If you grew up in the 70s or 80s, you remember exactly where you were the first time you heard that voice. Raspy, powerful, impossible to ignore. Bonnie Tyler didn't sound like anyone else on the radio, and that was the whole point. While other singers reached for sweetness, she reached for something rawer. Something that sounded like heartbreak itself set to music. She was born Gaynor Hopkins, the daughter of a Welsh coal miner, raised in a small house in Skewen, Wales, with an outside toilet and very little money. Nobody looking at that little girl could have guessed she would one day fill stadiums and top charts across the world. But that's the story we love, isn't it? The ordinary girl who became extraordinary. By the time Total Eclipse of the Heart exploded onto radios everywhere in 1983, Bonnie Tyler wasn't just a singer. She was a feeling, a soundtrack to 1,000 living rooms, 1,000 car rides, 1,000 slow dances at weddings we still remember. For women who came of age in that era, her voice wasn't background noise. It was the sound of being young, of falling in love, of believing anything was possible. Bonnie's journey to stardom wasn't handed to her. She left school as a teenager to work in a grocery store, and it was almost by accident that she found her way to a stage at all. Entered into a local talent competition by her aunt. She came second. It wasn't a win, but it was enough to change the direction of her entire life. A talent scout heard her sing in a local club, and everything shifted from there. In 1975, she signed with Urca Records and took the name that would soon be known around the world, Bonnie Tyler. 2 years later, she underwent surgery on her vocal cords, an operation that, instead of smoothing her voice, gave it that unmistakable rasp. The very thing that could have ended her career became her signature. Her debut record arrived in 1977, but it was her single, It's a Heartache, later that same year that sent her soaring onto the charts for the first time. Then came the moment nobody could have predicted would define a generation. She teamed up with legendary producer Jim Steinman, and together they created Total Eclipse of the Heart, a song that shot to #1 on both sides of the Atlantic in 1983 and never really left us. It became a wedding song, a karaoke anthem, a song strangers still sing together in bars decades later. Steinman and Tyler weren't finished. Holding Out for a Hero followed, a song that would find new life again and again through movies and television for generations after its release. She wasn't a one-hit wonder chasing a moment. She built a career, a Grammy nomination, chart-topping albums like Secret Dreams and Forbidden Fire and Bitter Blue. And in 2013, she stood on the Eurovision stage representing the United Kingdom. In 2023, she was appointed an MB for her services to music. This was a woman who never stopped working, never stopped touring, never stopped loving what she did. For most of her life, Bonnie Tyler seemed almost untouchable. Always on stage, always smiling, always ready for the next show. She spoke often about how much she loved performing, how she couldn't imagine ever slowing down. And for decades, that was true. Then, in early 2026, everything began to change. Bonnie had a busy year ahead of her. It was the 50th anniversary of her very first hit single, Lost in France, and she had a full European tour booked. Dates across Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Malta, and beyond, along with a run of UK shows in Manchester, London, and a deeply personal homecoming concert planned for Cardiff. She had just come back from a sold-out show in Belfast. She was, by every account, thrilled about what was ahead. But in early May 2026, Bonnie Tyler was admitted to hospital in Portugal for emergency surgery. She had a perforated intestine. A serious, sudden medical emergency that required immediate treatment. What should have been a recoverable situation took a devastating turn. In the days that followed, her condition worsened. She was placed into a medically induced coma, and for weeks, the world simply didn't know what was happening to one of its most beloved voices. Her scheduled shows were quietly postponed, then canceled. Fans who had tickets in hand for a tour they'd been waiting years for were left with only worry and silence. Somewhere in a hospital in Portugal, Far from the stages she loved so much, Bonnie Tyler was fighting for her life. What most people didn't know was just how close Bonnie came weeks earlier to standing exactly where she always wanted to be, on a stage, in front of people who loved her. In June 2026, her family shared an update that gave so many of us hope. She had woken from the coma. She was no longer unconscious, but she remained, in her team's own words, very unwell, still fighting in intensive care. What most people didn't know either was just how much resilience it had taken to get her there in the first place. This wasn't a woman who had ever known how to slow down, even when perhaps her body was asking her. As recently as late 2024, she had spoken about how young she felt inside, joking that although she was in her 70s, she felt decades and that she could barely sit still at home. That restlessness, that refusal to stop, had carried her through 50 years in an industry that isn't always kind to women as they age. Bonnie kept touring, kept releasing music, kept showing up as recently as 2025 and into 2026 with a single called Together, reaching the top 5 in France. What most people didn't know was how much of her strength, quietly, came from home. Behind the spotlight, there was Robert Sullivan, her husband of more than 50 years. They married in 1973, long before Total Eclipse of the Heart made her a household name, and he stood beside her through every triumph the industry gave her, and through private heartbreak too. At 39, Bonnie suffered a miscarriage, and she and Robert never had children. She spoke about it only briefly over the years, simply saying that it wasn't meant to. It's a quiet reminder that even the biggest voices carry private grief that never makes the headlines, and that behind every stage light, there is a person living a whole, complicated life the cameras rarely show us. On July 8, 2026, Bonnie Tyler passed away in a hospital in Faro, Portugal, following the complications from her surgery. Her family shared the news the next day, describing her passing as unexpected and asking for privacy as they came to terms with what they called nothing short of a tragedy. The tributes came quickly and they came from everywhere. Fellow Welsh star Catherine Zeta-Jones spoke of her broken heart at the news. Judd Lander, Bonnie's representative, remembered her as one of a kind, a woman with a stunning voice, a great sense of humor, and a stage presence nobody could replicate. Tributes arrived from the highest levels of government too, with a spokesperson for the Prime Minister calling her one of Britain's greatest recording artists, and Wales's own Secretary of State honoring her as a true Welsh music icon. Her husband, Robert, who had shared over 5 decades of marriage with her, was left to grieve the woman who had been by his side since before the world ever knew her name. No funeral arrangements were announced right away. Her family simply asked, in their darkest moment, for the space and privacy to process a loss that had come so suddenly after weeks of hoping. Bonnie Tyler leaves behind something that very few artists ever achieve, a song that doesn't just belong to one generation, but to all of them. Total Eclipse of the Heart has been streamed more than 1 billion times, revived again and again by real solar eclipses in 2017 and 2024, discovered by teenagers who weren't even born when it was written, and still sung, word for word, by women who first heard it 40 years ago on the radio. Her voice still fills karaoke bars on a Friday night. It still plays at weddings. It still comes on the radio and makes people turn up the volume without even thinking about it. That's not something you can manufacture. That's a life's work, connecting with millions of strangers who somehow felt like she was singing directly to them. In 2022, she gave us one more gift, a memoir called Straight from the Heart, letting fans into her story in her own words. Long before any of us knew how limited our time with her truly was, she never stopped creating, right up until the very end, still releasing new music into 2025 and 2026, still planning tours, still dreaming about the next stage and the next crowd. Bonnie Tyler's legacy isn't just a catalog of hit songs. It's the story of a coal miner's daughter from a small town in Wales who turned an unlikely, raspy voice into one of the most recognized sounds in the world, and who never, not once, stopped loving what she did. There's something deeply human about watching that final interview now, knowing what we know. Bonnie Tyler wasn't performing for the cameras that day. She was simply being herself, excited about her next tour, grateful for her band, still in love with the stage after 50 years. She had no idea, and neither did we, that we were witnessing the last time she'd share that joy with the world on television. Maybe that's the lesson in all of this. We rarely know which ordinary moment will turn out to be the important one. The last phone call, the last hug, the last time someone we love talks about their plans, their hopes, the things they're looking forward to. Bonnie Tyler spent her final months exactly the way she spent her whole life, moving forward, dreaming ahead, refusing to slow down. If there's comfort to be found here, it's this. She didn't leave us with regret. She left us with a song that will outlive every one of us. A voice that will keep playing in kitchens and cars and karaoke bars for decades to come. And a reminder to hold on tightly to the people and the passions that make our own hearts feel alive. So the next time Total Eclipse of the Heart comes on the radio, don't just listen, really hear it. Because somewhere in that voice is a woman who gave us everything she had, right up until the very last note. If Bonnie Tyler's voice was part of your story too, if you danced to her, cried to her, sang along in the car with the windows down, we'd love for you to share your memory of her in the comments below. Give this video a like if her music meant something to you, and subscribe for more heartfelt tributes to the icons who shaped our lives. Bonnie gave us her heart for 50 years. The very least we can do is remember her with ours.